Welcome to today's computing podcast with me, computing technology analyst Peter Gothard. Today we're looking into enterprise cloud security and whether we're doing enough to protect our businesses in the cloud environment, whether the cloud is really, as is popularly believed, less secure than on-premise. Basically, how can we ensure our cloud is secured as well as it can be in the enterprise? So joining me today to talk about this is Anish Chauhan, who's Director of Equilibrium Security Services, and Yves Mertens, who's Director of Cybersecurity for EMEA at Cisco.
Thanks for the introduction, Peter. Yes, as you quite rightly said, I'm Anish Chauhan. I'm the owner and director of Equilibrium Security Services. As a security-focused company, we've been delivering security solutions for a number of years now, and we've been doing it for businesses of all sizes. And in recent years, we've seen some incredible changes, and hopefully we'll be able to impart some of that experience and knowledge on you today.
Thanks, Anish. Also, I guess it's worth pointing out that you guys have actually set up a special area of your website to kind of deal with this podcast and further information around the topics. And I think people can find that at www.equilibrium-security.co.uk/podcast. I also believe people can call you directly if they want to talk to you, and they can get you on 0121 663 0055 on their telephones.
That's absolutely right.
Excellent. So, Anish, just staying with you here, perhaps you'd like to start off maybe by giving us, just in a couple of minutes, your personal view, really, of the current state of play in cloud security, maybe how things are looking at the moment for the average enterprise operating out of the UK.
Yeah, sure. There's no doubt that the cloud computing model is a fundamental part of any organization, really. I recall no less than sort of 7 or 8 years ago, maybe, that cloud computing model was being seen as a bit of a buzzword, and people were talking about moving to the cloud with real business decision makers using this word and perhaps not necessarily knowing exactly what that meant. Whereas reality, undertaking data center storage and computing and networking and the security around that, which is fundamentally what cloud computing comprises, it is something that's been the part of businesses and the strategy really for the best part of 20 years. Where I believe cloud computing has really gained some kind of mass adoption is as businesses have moved their IT infrastructure costs from a CapEx model to an OpEx, an operating expenditure model where they don't want capital tied up necessarily in assets and licenses that are going to depreciate over the years. Whereas actually the cloud computing model means that software updates and new features can all be handled by the cloud computing provider. So they haven't got that money tied up, and it's much more flexible, and that's why it's gained such mass adoption from small and large businesses alike.
Sure. So yeah, there's lots of positives. In fact, you've got a certain amount of agility really with buying into it. I mean, maybe if we dial back a bit then and look really at what the key issues security-wise actually are in the cloud and what steps organizations can be taking to mitigate those risks, using these cloud solutions. Yves, can you tell us a bit more about what is actually happening in the cloud at the moment, what people should watch out for?
Yeah, so maybe Anish and Peter, let me first introduce myself. So I'm Yves Mertens, Director of Cybersecurity in EMEA and leading basically the go-to-market for our partners in EMEA. So coming back, it's a pretty exciting and hot topic at the moment. Everything what's happening in the cloud, and like Anish was mentioning very correctly, you can see today our enterprises or even smaller customers moving basically. Their applications into the cloud, and so what you see today, it's not all moving to the cloud. It's what I would see in a lot of customers and hybrid solutions where you will have environments on premise and also environments in the cloud that need to intercommunicate in a certain way. So back to your question, Peter, about the issues related into the cloud in security is that I think because we are using cloud providers there, I think we have a shared responsibility on risk. And it's clear that today with the complexity of malware which is around there provided by our attackers, that we need to be watching out on that. And I would the phenomenon that I'm seeing today is related to ransomware malware. There is always elements like suspicious behavior. We have the compromised accounts, and then also the data breach compliance that are elements where we need to look into. But for me, it's important that it's not because you defining an environment as a customer in the cloud that you don't have any responsibility anymore on what hackers are doing today. I think it's a shared responsibility, and that's what we need to take care. And I think in the company themselves, they need to be in a firm way of education to go on with what people can do and may do. Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe less so now, but certainly there may still be a core of people who they just think that moving to the cloud automatically solves this problem, automatically kind of outsources this problem to their cloud provider. But I guess that's not really the case, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there is an enormous wave of belief that the cloud offerings, such as kind of Microsoft Office 365 as an example, to use a fairly common one, means that the security of that information is being processed and is being taken care of. But in actual fact, it couldn't really be further from the truth. There was a phrase that was used quite a few years ago, but I think it's still resonant now, is that the cloud, there's no such thing as a cloud per se, it's just somebody else's computer. And so you wouldn't really relinquish all your responsibility of information on the computer just because it's in somebody else's possession. There is definitely that wave of belief, and absolutely, it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, and especially with GDPR coming in, which I mean we'll talk about a bit more in another podcast. But we're getting to a point now where ever just saying, well, that's someone else's problem because it's gone over there is no longer an excuse.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, indeed.
So how do hackers typically get in? And then what happens when they do?
The hackers typically get in the same way, generally speaking anyway, as they would whether the services are hosted on-premise or in the cloud. And that's because the biggest form of business compromise is still, you can sort of boil it down to two main areas, and that's email and web links. So hackers, their biggest attack surface really is sort of unsolicited email. So they might be sending an email, a victim gets taken to a website where that might be either hosting malicious software, or it might be like a landing page where they can harvest confidential information for sale on the dark web. These are still the most common forms of attack. So really, whilst we have moved information to the cloud, we're still accessing it using email, and we're still accessing it using web links. So the fact that it's on premise or not doesn't change that too much, really.
So I mean, let's maybe talk about ransomware a little bit. If I was to ask, in the event of a ransomware attack, what should an organization do? Should they pay the ransom, in fact, or should they try to recover the data? And if they do pay, I mean, do they risk being on the hook forever? Yves, I don't know if you've got some thoughts on this.
Absolutely, Peter. For me, ransomware, you don't need to pay the ransom. I think companies need to educate their people on the risks of ransomware and making sure they can recover. So for me, everything is about proactivity today. And just to give as an advice, certainly like Cisco, we working with partners, and Equilibrium, one of them. They have practices in place on services where they can assess basically the security level of a company, and I can tell you they will come up, if they see gaps, they will come up with a recommendation on how to protect a company from ransomware. So Anish, I don't know if you want to add something on that, but I think that's the way you're going as well, yeah.
Yeah, spot on, Yves, really. I mean, the key, the question at the very top is, should they pay the ransom? Absolutely not. If you do, there are all these conversations and forums that take place on the dark web. The company's going to find themselves on that list and on a list of targeted companies because they pay. And ultimately, you are paying because you haven't got your proverbial ducks in a row. You haven't got good backups. You haven't got good security in place. You've no choice but to pay. And indeed, organisations like ourselves, we can certainly do gap analyses and understand where people are. So certainly, and that is what we have been doing a lot of in recent months, is looking at an organisation, doing the gap analysis. Where are your biggest weaknesses, and what can we collectively do to improve that?
So do you think ransomware is something that the industry is now mobilizing to actually be able to cope better with if it does become sort of an epidemic?
Whether they're coping better or not, I'm not sure at the moment. It kind of remains to be seen, because whilst organisations are waking up to ransomware, at the same time, and possibly even at a faster rate, ransomware is becoming more and more prolific. And remember, ransomware is still only a fraction, really, of the bigger cybersecurity piece. But I would certainly say that people are waking up to cybercrime as a whole as a result of being woken up to ransomware, indeed.
Good to know. Well, in terms of ransomware only being a piece, it might also be worth talking about Office 365 kind of in isolation. We're finding now that 90% of intrusions are coming through phishing and social engineering attacks straight into Office 365. I mean, is this environment secure?
So you hit a good question here, Peter. When we speak about ransomware, most of the time it's attached into an email. Okay, so what I can tell you is that there is a huge shift from traditional on-premise Microsoft Exchange to Office 365, and in that way, what I mean is that Cisco, we as a company, we offer an industry-leading email security solution to secure even more the Microsoft Office 365. What I mean with that is that the Cisco email security, if you add it with what we call the advanced malware protection, I was speaking about integrated architecture for email as an example, it will offer you more robust security features such as automatic mailbox remediation and best-in-class threat intelligence from basically our threat intelligence group, which is Talos. The other thing that we're doing at the moment together with our partners is that we have a tool in place which we call a threat analyzer, which gives the possibility, and this can be delivered through a service of our partners in this case, we can do some deep dive inspection on how the mailboxes are related to malware. So I think to be straight on your answer, I think Microsoft Exchange 365 is secure, but these attackers today, they are so intelligent that the malware is getting more complex, and I think by adding it with the Cisco offerings we have today, we can get to a much more secure environment.
That's good to know you're ahead of the curve.
I think Eve's raised a couple of really good points there, actually, Peter, if you don't mind me just jumping in for a moment. That email and web are still the biggest attack surface that hackers are using. We're using, email and web is the forefront of everything businesses do, and so as a result, having that as all our critical data being a route into all of that is where the hackers are going to target their efforts. So absolutely, and looking at that and doing the analysis around the web and email is really important. But another key important point to note here is that absolutely Office 365 is a secure environment. I do agree with what Yves is saying, but equally, because we're moving more and more to the cloud, there's almost this shift between sanctioned and unsanctioned apps as well. So whilst more and more people are using Office 365, they're using that to share and to collaborate. But what are they then doing regarding sharing information beyond that? Let's say you work with a third party or a particular person, you want to share some documents with them. They're on Office 365, they're not on Office 365, and you go, okay, well, hold on. How about we just share something via Dropbox? And so then you start moving beyond the realms of Office 365. Mm. And you started talking about sanctioned and non-sanctioned apps. So I think this is where the sort of security flaws can really expose a business.
So, I mean, would you sort of recommend that people are just using as little stuff as possible and trying to work within environments that don't require having to, add more sanctioned apps, or what would sort of be the utopian approach? Well,
I would really say there that the best approach is obviously to be awareness. Awareness is always a good starting point, because once you move into the realms of cloud, there's this grey areas actually what is sanctioned, what isn't sanctioned, because individuals within an organisation are so accustomed to having access to the data, just taking it a step further by sharing something in Dropbox from a mindset point of view doesn't seem so bad. It's like, well, hold on, it's all in the cloud anyway. What difference does it make if I share it via Dropbox or I share it via SharePoint or a OneDrive link? So yeah, it's making them understand and doing that analysis, because you start to get into the realms of sort of almost shadow IT, and this variation between what's sanctioned and what isn't sanctioned, and in ordinary users' minds that becomes a little bit blurred.
Absolutely. And the last thing you want really is the IT manager having to just lock everything down and then give nobody the ability to do anything, because then that's just going to affect productivity, I guess, on a daily basis. So it's about education really, and about everybody just working together, I guess, looking at the right kind of conclusion really.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we talked a bit earlier about the dark web, and about this idea of being on lists, being bandied around the dark web. I guess it's interesting really to consider, is the dark web now kind of more prevalent than ever for finding things like hackers for hire or botnets or doxing apps and services and other kind of nasties? I mean, is it really the bogeyman that a lot of people are looking at it as? What can we do?
I think we need to clarify first something, Peter, is the dark web isn't just for buying drugs and hiring assassins. It's a massive network of websites and communities that exist outside of mainstream internet culture, and there's plenty to do on the dark web without breaking any laws, from book clubs to crisis preparation, as an example. I would say, and if you look to the recommendation, you can find them if you Google it in a certain way. But there's also an explanation to be given between the dark web and the deep web, because there is a difference. I think it's worthwhile to clarify that. So the two terms, deep web and dark web, getting mixed up a lot. But the difference between them is pretty simple. So the deep web refers to anything you can not access in a search engine, either because it's protected behind a password or because it's buried deep within a regular website. The dark web is a subsection of the deep web that you can only access with a special browser like Tor to mask your IP address. And if you look into more details, it's important that you use that special browser because that's the way you can access in a certain way the dark web environment. And then again, there are methodologies where you can capture anomalies or malwares, and where I think it's important solely because most of our users often are connected from home when they try to get in there, is to have a very secure AnyConnect environment or a VPN environment there. So I think it's important that we don't make the dark web too dark, but that we really know what's the difference between the dark web and the deep web in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, Yves. I couldn't really put it more succinctly myself. But yeah, you absolutely need to not consider this dark web to be this magical, mystical thing. Really, it's fairly easily accessible, and I think businesses need to be aware that it's there. So by being aware that it's there, and it isn't just like he said, it's not just assassins for hire and things. There is intellectual property and exchanges of something as simple as credit card numbers, and even businesses, if they do know it's there, the likelihood of knowing that if they have been compromised, their intellectual property, anything that might consider key to their business, might be something as simple as a CRM list, that finds its way onto the dark web. You're not going to be too happy about that, but you need to be aware that this dark web doesn't exist in a magical, mystical place. It's there and it's at arm's reach.
Yeah. And it's becoming a resource really for, I guess, not just individuals that are kind of, into that thing or trying to personally profit, but also on something like an industrial level now, I suppose, with actual groups, out to kind of form a business around exploiting these sorts of resources. So yeah, plenty to think about and take in there. I hope we've covered all of the relevant topics today. But before we go, maybe if I just ask Anish and Yves if you have any kind of final takeaways from today's session. Maybe Anish, if we start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think the key thing is the point we've tried to hopefully get across is that it's all about kind of layered security, really. That needs to be adopted in every kind of organisation, really. So that's a combination of blocking things like command and control callbacks, which is how malware sort of calls home. Understanding undertaking a cloud security assessment, so you can understand what is going on in the cloud. Really be aware of that, because don't just push everything to the cloud and hope it's all been taken care of. Undertake that assessment and have a look at what is actually taking place and what information is being shared by your users. And of course, we've talked about employees being trained and being aware. That's such a key point, and it's so often overlooked. But yeah, ensuring that employees are trained and regularly updated to understand how to deal with, things like potential phishing attempts. So blending all those things together, keeping the layered security approach. There isn't one solution that's going to keep your cloud security strategy secure. So yeah, it's a combination of all of those.
Sure. Getting your house in order and sticking with a plan.
Indeed.
Yves, what about you? What's your key takeaway today?
I would like to reiterate what Anish was saying on the layered security. I think if you look at Cisco as a company, we have a strategy in place where it's all about detection of breaches, threats, malware, and basically is to bring the resolution of the detection of breaches to a minimum. And if you look to Cisco as a strategy and the detection, we do that in 3.5 hours, which is quite unique in comparison to other vendors into the market. And that's key. That's really key from a strategic perspective. You may be going to ask me how we do that. Is that we have a threat intelligence, which is a group of people, which is around 300 people, who is handling more than 20 billion of malware a day, which is 6 times more than a Google search. And back to that layered security that Anish was putting forward, is that we really believe that the way to go is that integrated architecture that you need to have into your construct of your security practices for companies. And I'm also convinced, like a reseller or a partner like Equilibrium, they can do that assessment and they can bring the intelligence around that. And let me add just 2 other things. So one thing is about that integrated architecture or layered security. And the second one is that if you look today to our customers, they have built an environment which has become very complex, because in their network they have put ad hoc individual solutions that is in certain ways even not compatible anymore. So I think that the other thing that customers need to look into that is creating that consistent environment where components in security end-to-end can interact with each other to know when a malware is happening on where you need to stop it. Yeah. So and that's where also the cloud is playing a role, where if something is happening, that with technologies like machine learning, as an example, where we do the handling of a malware in the cloud and then re-injecting basically the solution into the network. So so there are definitely components on awareness, on being proactive, and I think I'm convinced, like partners like Equilibrium, that they can bring definitely added value to the market on doing this assessment and get there.
That's fantastic, thanks. It sounds like a cracking partnership you guys have got, kind of filling in each other's gaps. Great. Well, thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Yves, and thank you, Anish. And thank you, the audience, for listening to this podcast brought to you today by Computing, Cisco, and Equilibrium. And please look out for the other podcasts in this security series entitled GDPR, You've Been Breached, You Have 72 Hours to Report, What Now? And also don't forget to check out computing.co.uk for all the latest news, analyses, and interviews from the UK IT industry. Thanks for listening.